Law enforcement officials are on high alert in New York and across the country as the grand jury mulls its decision on whether or not to indict former President Trump.
Well, should the grand jury choose to move forward with an indictment, it will be the first time in U.S. history a former president is charged with a crime. Trump is at his Florida home as he waits for the grand jury's decision. The panel is not believed to be meeting today, so it's unlikely that the president will be arrested this afternoon, as he predicted on social media over the weekend.
CBS News investigative reporter Graham Cates is outside the Manhattan District Attorney's office. Graham, if you don't mind just laying out the groundwork for us, I mean, there's been a lot of concerns about security after prompts or President Trump communicating with his followers and his base and concerns over protests. What are you seeing? How are officials preparing?
So there's a huge security apparatus here, but in terms of protesters, there's maybe a dozen or two protesters in support of Trump, maybe a few more against Trump. There's a large crowd of people who are kind of, it looks like, drawn to the spectacle, but it's really not that big of a show of protest just yet. That said, you can tell the signs are all around that the police have prepared for very large crowds.
Well, Graham, the grand jury is believed to be off today, which we mentioned, but I'm wondering what we were able to learn from yesterday's testimony.
So we heard from the one witness who was called yesterday. It was Robert Costello, who is a lawyer who's a former legal advisor to Michael Cohen. And again, Cohen is the kind of key witness against Trump in this. And what he said was that he told the grand jury that Michael Cohen is out for revenge against former President Donald Trump. And of course, then we heard from Michael Cohen, who said that Costello doesn't have all the facts, that his allegations against Trump and that the DA's allegations potentially against Trump are supported by documents.
And Graham, I mean, are there any hints as to where the grand jury stands on indicting the former president? This, of course, following what you were just talking about, what you could gather from yesterday's hearing.
Maybe not the grand jury itself, which again is composed of 23 just regular New Yorkers, but the fact that it's gotten to this point where they've invited former President Trump to come before the grand jury and that they've had a witness who was requested by President Trump's lawyers, that's evidence that at the very least the prosecutor himself is thinking of asking the grand jury for this indictment.
Yeah. Well, Graham Cates, thank you for joining us. Thanks for the coverage. I know you've got a busy day ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, for more on the legal implications of a possible indictment, we want to bring in CBS News legal contributor and former Manhattan prosecutor, Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca, this is your former office. You understand this as well as anyone. So tell us, how is the DA's office navigating the situation as this grand jury deliberates an indictment?
This is the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. They are used to extremely high-profile cases with a lot of media attention. So this is different, I would say, in degree, not in kind. As you said, it's a historic moment if the grand jury returns an indictment against a former president, but it is not new in certain ways for the Manhattan DA's office. And what they do is they keep their heads down. They do what they always do and treat this like any other case and try their best to shut out the noise from all of the preparations for protest, the security, and of course, all of the media attention that's going on right now.
Rebecca, I'm curious, given your experience, about, what's in your mind in terms of this case, of exactly how it's playing out, of how to kick it up from a misdemeanor to a felony, and what would happen if former President Trump is not indicted, because there's just so much political energy around it.
Well, absolutely. So first of all, this statute that is reported to be the statute, of course, we don't fully know, but is reported to be the statute that the prosecutors are considering charging the former president with falsification of business records, is one that is used quite frequently in enforcing the white-collar crime laws in New York. And so it's not unheard of. It is done quite frequently. I wouldn't say routinely, but it is used, quite frequently in cases like this. And so in some ways, I don't think it's, such a stretch for the Manhattan DA's office to have charged this crime. The question, of course, as you say, is in order to kick it up to a felony, they have to prove that the intent was not just to defraud when he put those payments down as legal fees when they were in fact not, but rather also to commit some other crime or conceal some other crime. And in this case, probably election fraud is the most likely crime that would be charged as that crime that the former president was seeking to commit by altering these records. And so, what would happen if the grand jury didn't indict? First of all, I think it's important to remember that the grand jury is not an adversary proceeding. The prosecutor is the advisor to the grand jury. And that makes it such that it is likely that if the prosecutor chooses to bring charges, to present charges to the grand jury, it will in fact indict. And second of all, the standard of proof is not the same at trial. So you do not have to prove these charges beyond a reasonable doubt to get that indictment. And because it's a much lower burden, it is also likely that they will come forward. And now that doesn't mean that this is a case that the prosecutor will ultimately win. But at this stage, I think there's less of a possibility that that indictment won't come down if the prosecutor is in fact committed to bringing those charges.
Yeah, the old saying that you can indict a ham sandwich, that anyone can be indicted, and then very often that leads to those charges actually being filed. And we should mention that the former president claims that he is innocent, but he also believes that he is going to be indicted and arrested, or so he says on social media. So if that's the case, Rebecca, what happens next?
So likely what would happen is that, you wouldn't see a storm of police officers at his home in Mar-a-Lago. That's not the way this would work. In fact, it would be worked out with his lawyers that he would come and surrender, in which case he would come for his arraignment and be booked separately without having a sort of official arrest.
But Rebecca, that's I'm sorry to interject, but that's how it normally works in the system. But President Trump doesn't do things the way the system normally works. And he said that he expects to be arrested. Is there a reason why if he chooses not to self-surrender, does that change anything about how the case proceeds?
It could. He could delay things and he could put up some sort of a fight. Ultimately, he would have to answer to these charges. But yes, I suppose if he wanted to turn this into a drama, he could do so. I somewhat expect that this particular part of it, he won't, just because I'm not sure that the spectacle would play out in a way that would be a public relations win for the former president. But perhaps he wants to display the law enforcement as somehow acting unreasonably. But if they give him every chance to come in and surrender and do this in a peaceful and safe way, then it seems hard to imagine that this would actually play out in his favor politically, even. But maybe.
Well, that's enough speculation for a day. We'll see what happens.
All right, Rebecca Roiphe, thank you.
Thank you so much.